Hi, this is Reg Athwal, and welcome back to our channel. And for those of you here for the first time, welcome to the Family Business Expert Show, where I get a chance to interview an entrepreneur, an expert who can give us their ideas, their insights, some words of wisdom that can help us at either a family level or at a business level. And today I'm really proud to have a dear friend of mine, Andy Lopata. He's a best-selling author. But before I get into his book, and let me give you a formal introduction. He's a specialist and a global authority on professional relationships, and he's been networking for over 20 years. Andy was called one of Europe's leading business networking strategists by Financial Times and a true master of networking by The Independent and Forbes.com. He's a very experienced international speaker. He's author of 5 books, and today we're going to be talking about his newest book that's just got released, Connected Leadership. So I can't wait to do a deep dive on that book with him. But outside of that, he's been quoted in a number of other business books and on a regular basis quoted in the international press. Andy is a fellow and board member of the Professional Speaking Association in the UK and Ireland. He's also a fellow of the Learning and Professional Institute as well, and a master of the Institute for Sales Management. Ooh, that's a big list. So on that note, Andy, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Reg.
Yeah, I'm loving the backdrop there, and it's great to see that you've got your new book being promoted. Now, I understand you've set a bit of a record, Andy, with this new book, haven't you?
Well, I don't know about whether it's a record or not. I haven't phoned the Guinness Book yet to check. But I'm very pleased. I mean, it from concept to publishing the ebook was 6 weeks.
Wow.
It literally is. It's a baby of lockdown.
Yeah, but it is full of substance. Okay, this is not a 20-page book. It's almost 130, 140-page book. So it's good for someone if they wanted to read it within an hour. But let's do a deep dive, Andy. You've got loads of books. You've always been talking about relationships, communication, networking to grow your business. In this particular book, you've got some really good, fresh information. And one of the things I want to focus on straight away in the book is why great leaders rely on strong relationships. Could you expand on that? Because that's your opening chapter in the book.
Yes, because it's a core concept. I think that, when you're a leader of a business, you have so many challenges thrown at you, and you immerse yourself in improving your expertise and your knowledge and your skill set in those key areas. You look at crisis management, you look at man management, you look at merger and acquisition or change management.
Yes.
I believe that underpinning the success of any challenge you have as a leader are strong professional relationships. If you take any of those issues, if it's crisis management, the relationships you have with those key stakeholders will dictate how much people will support you in the message that you're trying to get across. If you're looking at man management, having the right relationships with the key influencers within your workforce will help you, manage any particular issues.
But could we define, Andy, and I'll be dropping in with some of the things because sure. Other things will pop in my head. So what could we define what's a strong relationship and what's a real weak relationship?
Yes, in the book, I share the 7 stages of professional relationship because I think that we're so focused on numbers of relationships that we lack focus on the depth of relationships. So the 7 stages I talk about are recognize, so we meet at an event, we chat, a couple of weeks later, we'll recognize each other from that event. So you could argue we're in each other's network. We have a relationship, but it's tenuous at best. And if we don't follow up on that and develop it within 6 weeks, we're out of each other's networks. We'll bump into each other and have forgotten that we ever spoke. Right. So the next stage is where we know each other. We will recognize each other. We'll know where from. We'll know what each other does, perhaps. Then you go into liking each other and trusting each other, and then people who will support each other. So if I picked up the phone to you and said, Reg, could you help me with this? I know that you would be happy to do so. Then level 6 is advocate, where you're going out and looking for opportunities for me anyway. And I don't need to ask you. And level 7 is friend, where we're now moving into each other's personal.
Can I ask you, just halfway through those steps, in order for someone to refer you to someone or even consider doing business with you, the level of trust that has to be built, yeah?
Yes.
So as that relationship's being built, is there anything else you could expand on, Andy, where, because it's such a fine line, that you go from one step to another, but in between is trust. How do you build real trust and genuine? It's not just because someone's given you some marketing collateral or showed you their beautiful resume or their LinkedIn profile looks wonderful and they've got a lovely picture. How do you get to real authentic foundation trust?
Well, there's a number of different ways, and I think personality comes into it a lot. Some people are more trusting than others. Some people gel with you more than other people. And if you find you have a rapport with someone straight away, you are likely to accelerate how quickly you're willing to trust them. So that will come into it. There's also what I call associated trust. So if I meet you, so we met years and years ago through the Professional Speaking Association when you were in the UK. Now, by the very fact that we were both members of the PSA and the fact that you already had an established reputation in the PSA, that associated trust, i.e. you were already recognized by a trusted body, helped accelerate the trust that I had with you. Or it may be that we know people in common, yes, and that person's spoken highly of you. So trust doesn't, trusted relationships don't all start from the same level. I think very rarely, actually, we start from what I call trust neutral. We either have a negative trust because of association or environment or appearance, yes, or we have accelerated trust for the same reasons. You build it by listening. You build it by being responsive. You build it by being reliable. You build it by being by focusing on the other person more than you focus on yourself. And you mentioned something, I can't remember if you used the exact word, but the spirit of it certainly was authenticity. I think people can smell inauthenticity. Yeah. And if you try too hard, if you're too smooth, the old stereotype of the smooth salesman is often used to show people you can't trust. So if you're too honed, too smooth around the edges, then I think people are more wary, more cynical. Yes. That authenticity really needs to shine through as well.
But how do you? So I had this situation recently, Andy. I'm thinking about there's some cultural differences as well in our part of the world. I mean, obviously we've got a global viewer base watching this. They could be from anywhere in the world, but with the work we do with family businesses, typically around Africa, Middle East, and all South Asia, there's cultural differences as well when it comes to trust. So, for example, in the Arab world, in the Middle East, there's something called wasta, which is, it's almost like a unwritten ground rule. And if someone's going to refer someone else to you, they will not do it unless there's wasta. It's almost like, if I'm going to refer you to this person, I'm putting my reputation on the line. My life is on the line here, which is I've done all my due diligence. I know them, I trust them, and that's it. If I'm going to give you this name, it's fine. It's done. What are your thoughts around concepts like that and cultural things where it's about checking someone out and absolutely knowing, does this person really stack up? Because sometimes you could build a trusted relationship with people, refer someone, but you don't know whether they can deliver. And then it could backfire on your reputation.
Yeah, I think I've written about Worcester in the past, whether it was in Recommended, my third book, or whether it was in a blog, I'm not sure off the top of my head, but I have talked about that concept in the past. And yet you will have cultural differences and you have to be aware of them. I remember speaking in Romania quite a few years ago, probably the best part of a decade ago. So they weren't that far out, maybe 20 years out of communist rule. And trust in that environment was still a very different concept to the one we have in Western Europe. And it was really interesting to see the differences on the ground there. So you have to understand that those cultural differences. You mentioned Asia. If I'm going to refer you and things go wrong in Asia, then I lose face, and that's such an important concept in Asian cultures that's going to influence the type of any recommendation. I think there's two parts to the answer. The first part is in Recommended, I talk about two types of referral.
Mhm.
So I talk about an unqualified referral. An unqualified is, there's no doubt Reg is the person you've got to talk to. He's brilliant. I've used him before. Absolutely, he's the guy. Qualifying it is where you say, well, look, I don't know Reg. I've not worked with him before. What he says seems to fit what you're looking for, but you need to take that responsibility yourself.
That's
You
good.
choose
I
your
like
own.
that. Yeah, that's a great way of dealing with it.
And one of the ways that one of the questions that I ask when I pass that is, if you do use Reg, would you give me some feedback, because it will be useful for me going forward,
Very good.
so to know whether I can refer. So I'm being really explicit
Mm.
that it's not an unqualified trusted referral. So you can do that. The other is, if you're seeking,
Mhm.
and whether it's referrals or whether it's any other type of trust-based support, if you're seeking that, patience. Don't expect someone you have just met to put their name on the line for you and their reputation on the line for you.
Mm.
Instead, seek to build the relationship over a period of time.
Yeah.
Seek to support them. I talked about those 7 stages of professional relationship. You're starting at stage 1. You get to stage 5 and 6 before you ask for that support. That's not always possible. Sometimes you meet the person who can give you the help you need urgently,
Mm.
but you've got to recognize that when you're in that situation, you're on the back foot
That's
and
good.
you can't expect unqualified support.
I love that. Yeah, some really good tips there, Andy. And I love the wording of that as well, with the right tone and tempo, said the right way. So moving on from there, how do you expand into protecting your reputation? I mean, that's something that comes up a lot with a lot of our entrepreneurial clients, family business owners, family businesses that have been around for multiple generations. Reputation is everything. What's your tips with your experience? How do you go around, or how do you go about protecting your reputation?
There's a few things that you can be aware of. Um, First of all, social media has brought a magnifying lens on our lives.
Mm.
And in the past, when I first came into the workplace 30 years ago, um, your work life and your personal life was separate, completely separate. Um, I found, it didn't take very long, certainly after the advent of social media, before you realize that line is now very, very blurred to the point of dissolving.
Mm.
And I now have a mantra, and I talk about the background to this in the book, um, that I won't behave in any way in my personal life that would embarrass me if someone from my professional life witnessed it. And I think that but I'm 50 now.
Have you deleted all those old naked photos?
Yeah, let's not go into. But I think I'm at an age where you would hope that I would act with a certain degree of respectability. Maybe not everyone does, but certainly when you're younger, I think that it's tempting to think that the two worlds are separate, and they're not necessarily. That doesn't mean you can't have fun. That doesn't mean you can't have a personality. It doesn't mean you can't do some things that are a little bit more edgy,
Yeah.
but you have to be comfortable with your top prospect, your top client, your top employee
Mm.
seeing that, and it wouldn't embarrass you. That's the line for me. I go to punk concerts, I go to football, I go to a lot of sport, and I enjoy myself.
Mhm.
But I think I work with a lot of blue chip organizations globally. How would they view me? And I behave accordingly. And I think it's quite a simple rule of thumb. So that's number one. Number two is count to 10. Really simple advice. Reputations can be ruined like that, less than a second, millisecond, and particularly when emotions come into play.
Mhm.
So count to 10. I'm in
Could you expand? What do you mean? Like, why count to 10? For what reason?
what I mean by that is just pause and don't take your first reaction. Take
Ah,
a sense check of your first reaction.
so
Ask yourself,
is that a
is
bit like is that a bit like somebody WhatsApping you or emailing you and it annoys you? You decide to respond straight away, and then you get into this tit for tat argument when really,
yeah, you remember years ago, both of us were on a social network called Academy,
yes,
and people posted things at 12 midnight and at 2 a.m. that they would really regret the next day.
yes,
We had a name for it, which I won't repeat here,
yes,
but it really destroyed their reputation. There are people who are on that platform, I've heard fantastic things about professionally, I would never do work with because of the way they posted. So yeah, it's about understanding the consequences of your actions. And yes, you can have a WhatsApp spat. That could be an example, but it doesn't have to be an in the moment social media. I've got a business dispute that's brewing at the moment, and the last few days I've been feeling very litigious about it and very angry, and I want to be proved right. I woke up this morning and I thought to myself, no, just pick up the phone. Stop bringing the lawyers in. You know, I'm dealing with their legal department. Just pick up the phone, try and talk reason and sense, human to human. And that's what I mean about just taking the time to reflect. And I guess that leads to the third point. And the third point is I did a self-development program a few years ago called Landmark.
Yep.
And one of the biggest things that I learned from it.
I did that when I was around 18, 19 years of age.
You
so,
did that?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a fantastic program. And one of the biggest things I learned from it that has stuck with me and I think has really, really been the longest lasting impact on me is nothing has meaning other than the meaning we apply to it. So what happens is when someone else does something, we take it personally and we assume it means something. And very often their motivation is different to the motivation we apply to their action. So taking a few moments out to calm down, to reflect, and to respond in a way that just explores, which is, I guess, what I'm trying to do with this dispute at the moment, means that ultimately, rather than having winners and losers, we don't end up in that sort of binary situation in the first place. And we can find a way that works for everyone, and that protects your reputation. So it's the way you deal with people.
Can I ask you, going to the first part of that process? I've had these cases where you've got a family brand, been around for many years, and you talk about everything's integrated now on social media. There's no distinction between that platform. Someone could share there, and it'll pop up somewhere else. So, what happens when you've got your principles as a family, and you're clear on what to do, what not to do, but then the next generation, who are built differently, are all over social media. Their operating system is it's okay to share. It's okay to share everything, but that could be having an impact on the business brand. Have you ever had a case like that? How do you deal with that, where it's already on the internet?
There's a couple of things. We're a family business. I founded this business with my father, and we're very different generations. There's 30 years difference between us, and we have different ideas on business. And he's pretty much retired now, but he's still active. He still knows what's going on in the business, and we still discuss key decisions. In the early years of working together, we've worked together for over 20 years now. In the early years of working together, we clashed a lot. And I think there are two sides to this. From his perspective, I was probably too pig-headed, full of, this was my problem. When I was in my 20s and 30s, I knew everything. I knew the lot. And we clashed because his view of the world and where, what worked, and my view of the world and what worked were not the same. I was too pig-headed. I didn't respect his experience. I didn't stop and listen. From the other side, I was being exposed to what was happening in the market, new means of thought, predominantly through the PSA, which we mentioned before, that he had an experience of. And his experience of where he was most successful was an environment that no longer existed. So what we needed to do was learn from each other. And that means both parties being open. So the second part of that is to sit down and talk, not to instruct, not to lecture, not to lay down the law, but if you invite that next generation to teach you why they think social media is so important, why they think authenticity and sharing is so important, and why they want to share from a personal perspective, which I do. If you get that, and then you explain to them what your reservations are, then hopefully you can come to a way of moving forward which everyone subscribes to, and it means both sides letting go of something, and as speaking as someone from that younger generation in that family business,
Yes.
you learn when to give and you learn when to push, and you know that over time, if your approach is right, and this is another key point, if their approach is right, you have to concede it. And so I know that over time, I've been able to grow the business in the direction I saw because I've been able to prove the ideas I brought to it rather than impose them. And I think it's creating that culture of learning from each other that sees your path forward. Easier said than done, I admit, and I've been there, but that's what I would strive for.
Yeah, some really good words of wisdom there for someone who's been through, the family business, legacy situation from one gen to the next, and this is a battle that's coming out regularly regarding social media. But one of the things in your book that you've got, and it'd be great to understand this a bit more, is how social should you be? Yeah. So we're not just talking social media, we're talking online as well as eventually after lockdown and these restrictions and traveling again, getting out there and getting in front of people. Could you give us your thoughts on online as well as offline? How social should you be?
It really depends where you're at and what you want to achieve. If you have a strong network already,
Mhm.
don't go out hell for leather to meet new people. Focus on seeing and engaging, whether online or face to face, with the people you have existing relationships with. Think of those 7 stages of professional relationship. If you've got a network of people at level 3, focus on getting them to level 5 rather than getting more people in at level 1. So I think you have to be thoughtful in the way you do that. You need to be strategic in recognizing where the gaps are in your network
Mhm.
and saying, well, look, I'm lacking influence in this area, or I'm lacking information in that area. So actually, I need to go out and I need to engage,
Mhm.
whether it's at conferences when they're back, or whether it's in LinkedIn groups or wherever it might be. I need to go out and engage in those areas where I'm not currently served. Um, and then the third element is to allow for relationships to happen naturally as well. So if you're out and about and you're engaging, relationships will flourish because you have rapport and things in common with people and conversations spark. So in terms of how social you should be, all of that leads to a strategic approach. And my client's biggest challenge is time.
Right.
I don't have time to go on LinkedIn. I don't have time to go to networking events. I don't have time to meet people for coffee or meet them for lunch.
Mm.
I'm a great believer that time is a cost. And when you run a business,
Mm.
you view a cost as an investment. Am
Yes.
I getting a return on it?
Mm.
If you know that by investing, if I told you that you invest 10 hours a week over here,
Mm.
you'll double your turnover for the year, you'll find that 10 hours a week.
That's right.
So it's not about that relationship building taking time. It's about understanding what you're trying to achieve through that relationship
Can I
building
ask
and the
you, Andy,
time.
just to hook on to that,
Yeah.
between quantity and quality,
Mm.
and that step, that 10-step, whatever process is, what's your thoughts around how many people do you need really to build trusted relationships with and go through those steps that you mentioned where business would flourish? Uh, and it's not about having 1 million followers on Instagram.
I wouldn't put a number on it. Um, I think that's the wrong approach.
Okay.
I think you have to understand who you need in your network and
Mm.
where your gaps are. And that will be different depending on the industry you're in. It will be different depending on the time you do have available. It will be different depending on the industry you're trying to impact as well. So if you sell a very niche product to a very niche industry that has 2 or 3 key influencers, why do you need to go out and get 1 million Instagram followers?
Mm.
If you are selling business to consumer, low low cost, low ticket items, low margin items
Mhm.
that are best sold through social media platforms, then you want to go out and get a huge number of
Yeah,
followers.
that
There's
makes
no set answer to that. In the book, I talk about the types of relationship you want. if you want a strategic approach. And I share a relationship chart, and I've touched on two of the three types of people in my previous answer. I talk about having people who have influence, people who can make introductions, and people who can give you information, ideas, and insight. Since the book's been published, I've been working on, with the support of a couple of clients, an extension of that helps you actually map this out, and plan it out, and start to put your existing network into the key areas, so you can see where you need to grow the relationships, where you need to ask for certain support, and also where the gaps are. The answer is much more about strategic thinking like that than it is about, well, I'm up to 200, let me get another 100.
Yeah, I like that. So there's a science to this, isn't there? Where you're talking about, okay, you've got your vision, you've got your strategy, you've got your growth plans, and then you're saying, right, you've got all these different connections and databases and people. I can actually visualize that within our own company right now as well, where you've got people all over the place: WhatsApp groups, social media, private databases, intranets, newsletter list, personal connections that only people I speak to, and the same approach is not going to work for everyone, is it? There's a science here. And going back, I think you mentioned a bunch of I's there. So I don't know, if that's part of the structure you mentioned. So people of influence, you mentioned information, insights, and what else?
So it's influencers,
Yeah,
introducers or intermediaries,
introducers. Okay, yeah,
and sources of information, insight, and ideas.
got it. Lots of I's.
Lots of I's. I did call it my 3-eye pie, but
well, it sounds like a five eye model now. So with all the I's, and then I'd chuck in another one in there: improvements. Which is great. So So what you're saying is, Andy, you take those different areas, 3, 4, 5 of them, and then you'll look at your contacts, and then that starts to give you some structure. Is that right, of what to do next?
Yeah, but what I'll do is you work it around a specific project. So you might say, for example, here's an industry that we want to target, or here's a client that we really want to get in with. And you say, within that client, who are the key influencers? Or sorry, within that project. So within that, if we're going to get into that client,
yes.
Who are our key stakeholder groups? So who has an influence on our success? So obviously the client organization, there will be key people. Maybe within your own organization, particularly if you're over a certain size, there are going to be key people who have a stake in this. And in your client's industry, there might be. So for example, I work with the pharmaceutical industry as one of my client groups. I know other speakers who work with pharmaceutical industry, so they might be stakeholders in me breaking into a certain client in the pharmaceutical industry.
Got it.
And then within each of those stakeholder groups, I'll say who has influence, who can make introductions, who can give me information, insight, and ideas. And then I look at my existing network and say, who do I know, where do they fit, and how strong is my relationship with them? And I'll say, where do I need to build the relationship? Where do I have the relationship, but I'm not asking for the right help? And where are the gaps?
That's good. I like it. Really good. So again, you can see Andy's details there on screen, but we'll make sure in the description area, we've got Andy's details again, and also how you can connect with him on LinkedIn. Go and find out, more about what he does when it comes to projects and consulting. And don't forget to get a copy of his new book from Amazon as ASAP. So moving on from there, Andy, let's assume for a second you've got a first generation entrepreneur. They've got a good product, a good idea, good service. They've got their website done, a bit of collateral. They're sort of good to go, but they're scratching their head. They're in their office going, I don't know anyone. And literally, let's say they don't know anyone. They don't have the contacts that we have, that we've built over the years. They literally have no one on their database, okay, apart from their immediate family and a few friends. Yeah. And they need to build these professional relationships now. What's your advice for someone like that? Doesn't matter what age they are, but they're raw, first generation entrepreneurs starting from scratch.
I would look, first of all, at what your urgent needs are, and then at what you need to plan in the longer term. So for urgent needs, if you need urgent sales, you may need to revert to cold calling and to other forms if you don't have the existing contacts. Relationship building and referrals are a medium to long-term strategy. So I should be really clear that if you're reaching out to people to build a relationship and trying to sell to them, something's going to struggle. You've got a conflict there.
Mm-hmm.
So decide what it is you're trying to do. In terms of building the relationships, there's several things I would do. I would start with the people they do know,
Mm-hmm.
friends, family. A lot of the cultures that you work with, particularly Reg, I know are very family oriented, and the family will be very supportive of the business and of anyone starting a business. So that is a huge resource. Turn to the people who want to help you. The culture I live in the UK, we go to the other extreme, and there are so many people who hate the idea of turning to their family for support and help. I get uncomfortable selling to family and friends. That's something I try and avoid. But asking them for help and support is something different, because if anyone wants you to succeed, it's them.
That's right.
So if you have family and they have contacts, I would ask them. But a couple of things. One, don't pump them for support. Be sparing in the support you ask for, and make it easy for them to help you. And by making it easy for them to help you, you don't turn around and say, I don't know anyone. Who do you know I should talk to? You turn around and say, I'm starting this business. I recognize these are the key people I need to know at the moment. Who do you know in these areas? And frame that question to be someone they know.
Andy, let's say that doesn't work for whatever reason. They don't have those relationships, or they're scared of cold calling, and now they decide, okay, I've heard of this thing called LinkedIn.
Yeah,
I've seen this with youngsters right now, or in their 20s, who we've worked with, who are trying to set up their businesses. And you mentioned LinkedIn. They go, that's for old people, isn't it? And you realize, oh wow, this is a professional network. And so let's say that they're really. I know I'm talking basics here, but I think there'll be different types of people who may watch this episode now and in the future, and I want to give value at different levels. So if you're going to LinkedIn for the first time, with all of your experience now with networking and people and relationships, and what you speak on and consult on, what are some 3-4 tips on getting that right, and how you should use LinkedIn?
So now, first of all, before you reach out to anyone, get your profile right. As soon as you click asking someone to connect, the first thing they're going to do is look at your profile. So if you try and put the cart before the horse and connect before you have a profile, their first impression of you is a very poor one, because they see nothing. So get a strong profile picture, a strong professional headline, a compelling summary that talks about the impact your business will have on other people, not all about you, but about your philosophy, about what you're trying to achieve, about the challenges people are having. And I wouldn't make it a sales page either. Feel free to have a look at mine, how I present it, and let some humanity come through. But make sure those key things are in place. So as long as you've got a strong profile picture, a strong professional headline, and a strong summary, you'll be in a good place. There's more to do on the profile, but that will get you started. Then connect with people you know. Now, I know you said people might not know many people, but they'll have family, they'll have friends, they'll have people they went to school with and university with. So it's to start connecting with those people. By doing that, you start to build a network of people that maybe you've connected on a personal level, but their professional expertise may support you in what you're trying to achieve. And because LinkedIn is a professional platform, you're starting to bring them into that world, particularly when you start posting on there as well and sharing what you're up to. So it's a means of communicating to your network what you're about. The other thing having an existing network on there does for you is that when you search key people you want to meet, you increase your chances of them being a second degree connection. And what that means is that they are already connected to someone you know. And if your network at that stage is only people you know, and you see someone you want to meet is second degree, you can pick up the phone to the mutual connection and say, would you introduce me? So that helps you grow that network further. You then have a choice to make, and it's not A or B. There's shades in between. But there are people who have a very closed approach to LinkedIn, and they will only connect with people they know. I am closer to that side. I'm not wholly on that side, but I'm closer to that side of the equation. There are people who will connect with anyone. They're called LinkedIn Open Networkers or Lions. And they recognize that the wider your network, the more reach you have. I would argue that that reach doesn't count for a lot in terms of connections if no one knows each other. But what they do have, it's brilliant as a marketing tool if you post a lot, because you get more views on your post because it reaches your second degree network. So you have to make a choice what your criteria to connect are. So your criteria to connect might be, I know you and trust you. You are known by people I trust. But be careful with that, because if they're connected to open networkers, then it will look like they know people you know, but they may not. But that might be a criteria with a bit of a nous behind it.
Yes.
It might be you're an influencer in an industry that's important to me. It might be you're someone I ultimately want to sell to.
Mm.
Then you can start to reach out and request connections with those people. But here's what you do. If you are connecting through desktops, you can do searches. You know, we can't do a whole LinkedIn training here, but you
Yeah.
can search for key people you want.
Book Andy separately for the LinkedIn training. Okay? Yeah.
But you know, just to give this piece of advice, what I would do is find key people you want to connect to. If you're doing it through your desktop computer, click connect, and it will ask you if you want to add a note. Add a note, and make that note about them. Read their profile first. Tell them why you want to connect and why they might want to connect with you, not in a sales way, but what the similarities are, what you admire about what they've achieved, things like that. If you're doing it through your mobile phone or your tablet, do not click connect on their profile, but go to the three dots next to it and then click on personalize connection. I can't remember the exact wording it uses, but send a personalized request or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then add the note there. But personalize it, and you'll have a much better chance that people will respond. When they accept, many people don't read that personalized message or respond to it. So when they accept, then follow up with another message that says thank you for accepting and repeating your original message. Diary it for a week and find another reason to connect with them. What you're trying to do,
just quickly,
just to finish that, Red, what you're trying to do is draw them into a conversation. You've got conversation rather than just a connection.
Yeah, that's really good tips. I'm just wondering though, sometimes on LinkedIn, and I get hundreds of these a week, there's people who are manipulating the system, aren't they? Because they've automated this.
Yeah. I was interviewing a friend of mine, a speaker in America. I don't know if you know her, Julie Holmes. And Julie has a star before her name on LinkedIn. And I didn't realize this, but it means that when people automate it, any automated message to her says, "Dear Star, Julie."
That's brilliant.
And she knows straight away.
Yeah.
And I think that's a wonderful way of doing it.
Mine, I know because my title's quite long, where I've got some extra bits after my name.
Yeah. Same
which
thing.
is nothing to do with my family name or my first name. So then I know.
Yeah, same thing.
Yeah.
I think you can tell the automated approaches. I believe I can. And if you personalize that connection request, then you know, or they'll know. When people send me a connection request and I don't know them, and it just says, "I'd like to add you to my professional network on LinkedIn," they'll get a reply from me. 9 times out of 10 or 99 times out of 100, they'll get a reply from me. And the reply will say, because of the way I use LinkedIn, I prefer an established relationship with the people I connect with, but I don't like to ignore anyone. Tell me what led you to connect. And I would say 75% don't respond. So 3 weeks later, delete. They're gone. But for the ones that do respond, I can then measure whether they're automated, whether they've read my profile, you know, whether they're paying any attention. Because so many people come back and say, "Oh, thank you for connecting with me," and I'm thinking, but I haven't. I've said I want to know more. So there are so many disqualifiers within those responses as well, because they're not truly engaging with me, and that tells me enough.
Yeah.
Where they make an effort, then I'll start a conversation with them.
Yeah, and what I like about what you said is, I really, for me, learned something there as well, which is the difference between someone who's got a closed network strategy, someone who's got an open network strategy. And I think there's no right or wrong there. It depends on what they're trying to achieve. And you're right, if someone's posting a lot, articles or other things, it makes sense to have a wide following. But then, Andy, where do you think the whole thing is going with LinkedIn and same as other social media platforms? I mean, I remember you being on the platform 20 years ago, whenever it was talking about just, and I think you've got it as part of your strapline with your company brand. It's more than just the network and being connected. And I feel, my personal opinion, I'm debating this with you, is that people are just getting lost in a lot of these platforms. And because excuse my language, and I'm not, being offensive to him, but every Tom, Dick, and Harry, is on there. And then you've got everyone who are open networks who are also on there. Well, it just multiplies, doesn't it? You get to a point where do you really go? And I think it goes, in my opinion, I'd love to know your thoughts, is you end up going full circle, going back to basics, going back to the old fashioned way of just knowing 30, 40, 50, maybe 100 people and building those relationships. I don't know, but what are your thoughts around that?
I think there is a problem, and there always has been a problem with LinkedIn and these platforms, because they don't educate people well enough on how to use them effectively, and they send mixed messages. LinkedIn will say, are you sure you know this person before you want to connect? But at the same time, it will throw up loads of algorithm-driven suggestions for people to connect with, who 90% of whom you don't know. It will tell me to connect with people who went to the same university as me 10 years before or after. Now, what are the chances I know them? They haven't, their algorithms are quite lazy. And then I've applied 3 times to have LinkedIn Live, so I can do live streaming on there. I don't get it because I don't have 10,000 connections. Well, how does that fit with your message of don't connect with people if you don't know them? There's very strong mixed messages there. And the education is left to third parties, and it's not supported very well by LinkedIn. So I think there's a big issue there. I think there's one big difference that means I don't think we will revert back to the way the world was before. And again, I think it's something I talk about in the book, and it's something I've talked about a lot over the years. I backpacked when I was 25, traveled the world for 15 months. And when I traveled the world, I wrote physical letters home, because we didn't have email, we didn't have mobile phones, we didn't have social networks. I wrote handwritten, photocopied letters, wrote a 5-page letter, photocopied it, and sent it to 10, 15 people. And they got passed hand to hand. One of my best friends was Irish, and she used to send them on to her mum in Ireland, who still has had them all. She sent them back to me a few years ago. Says, look, I got all your letters. A few years later, I'm sorry, just last point on that. When you travel like that, the people you met became your best friend in the world. So you'd stay in a hostel, let's say I was in Sydney for 6 weeks, and I hang around with the same crowd. We did everything together. We became really close. And then I went north, and they might have gone south, and we never saw each other again because we didn't have the means to stay in touch. By the time I was back in the UK, they may have been back a year and gone back to their normal world, or they were still traveling. So you didn't have that way of reconnecting. I did meet the person who became my best friend on that journey. He went back a few years later, by which time email had arrived. And then again, a few years later, and you get into the 2000s when social media came along. And suddenly he met people, and they remained his friends throughout his journey and beyond. Now, my nieces are in the workplace now, and in their networks are all the people they went to school with, all the people they went to university with, all their people from their first job, their second job, and so forth.
Yes.
And so that generation is a connected generation. You touched on it earlier with the different generations in the family business. And that won't change. We can, I remember I talked about the presentation in Romania earlier. I went back there 4 years later because someone I met who was another speaker that day put an event on, and we had stayed connected on LinkedIn. Now, 10 years before, that wouldn't have happened.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah, so there's almost like a blend of the two. Do you recommend everyone at a young age goes backpacking for 15 months around the world?
Oh, absolutely. I remember Mike Southern, who you'll know.
Yes.
Mike Southern interviewed me years ago, and I can't remember the question, but I remember saying the world would be such a better place And it would be better for everyone individually. And I know this isn't practical, but if every 10 years we could take a year out and travel,
Yeah.
it is such a refreshing thing to do. It's such an eye-opening thing to do, and it changes your view of the world. I'm lucky in my work, that I can travel and see different cultures, and also in my work that I don't travel as a tourist. I travel and I spend time with people in that local area, which I think is important. And as a backpacker, is what you should ideally do. It's no good going to Sydney for 6 months, working, living in just in a backpackers, spending your whole time with backpackers and coming home. That's just an extended holiday.
Yeah,
You know,
the
I'm
reason why I'm asking is that I
yeah,
was reading a book recently from the founder of Nike, and
yeah,
he talks about it in Shoe Dog, about how he traveled at a very young age, went
mm,
backpacking, went around the world, and that's how he ended up with the ideas
yeah.
to
No,
launch his business and also develop the relationships in China, Japan, or wherever that supported those ideas when he was going to set up. So, and he talks about that everyone should do it, and when you're young, get it out your system, go do it. But there's lots of other benefits for doing it in the which will come back round.
I would argue doing it when I was 25.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people go when they're 18, 19, and I don't think they can value it in the same way.
Mm.
I'd spent 4 years in horrible civil service jobs, and so I valued that experience far more because I'd had 4 years in the workplace. And I think taking that message as well, if you're an entrepreneurial thinker when you're 18, then you're going to gain a lot from it. If you're not, then go in your early to mid 20s and you'll gain so much more.
Good advice. So with the time we've got, Andy, a few more things I just wanted to
Yeah.
ask you. You talk a lot about influence and the importance of it. So why is it important? But also, how do you build influence?
It's important because you can't be present with every decision that's made that relates to your business or your career. You need other people to speak up for you. You need other people to respond to the right messages. And if you're not in that room, then influence is the key. So you need to know who's involved in any decision. You need to know who people listen to when it comes to those decisions and what they need to say. What's pressing. How you gain influence is through building strong relationships. So you get the insight you need to understand the influences through your network. You focus not just on the one person within let's say a client organization that you've got a strong relationship with, but you seek to build visibility and relationships with other key people as well. So seek opportunities to meet their colleagues,
Right.
seek permission to follow up with them, and you have to be conscious of not making sure your main contact loses face. Involve them in that in that journey. And it's simple things like asking them who else uh, who else would it help for me to engage with to help you get the decision you want through.
Yeah, got it.
How else can I support you with this? Is there anyone else I need to meet who needs to best understand this? I'm happy to do that. And then I always copy in the key person who introduced me in follow-up so they don't feel I'm going behind their back. So that would be key ways to build influence. Another key way of building influence is by being a thought leader.
Being published like yourself, yeah. Make sure.
Being published. I'm not one who says everyone should write the book. I don't think it's for everyone. I think there is value in it. It is a big task, particularly if you take it seriously, and if you don't, you can damage your reputation. And there's a lot of work, a lot of effort involved. You don't need to write a book, but it is one option. But you can speak at events, industry events. You can write white papers. You can post blogs and articles on LinkedIn and other sites, and you can comment on other people's blogs and articles. There are many ways to be a thought leader other than just writing a book.
And I would add to that, Andy, where in our circle of clients and people who
Mm,
we add value to, we recently did a private webinar for all of our trusted contacts, and we're doing this every month now with 5 panelists. But it's shocking, how many people are very shy from speaking. And it was an eye opener for me also when I was inviting people to be on the panel, where people I've never been on a panel, and or, well, I've been on a panel at a live conference, but I don't know how it works online. So there's the educational process there as well. But once they had done it, and I said, look, this is how it works. Don't worry. These are the steps and so on. This is how we log on. This is what will happen. Don't worry about the other people. They can't, they're not, they're not going to be on the screen with you, just the other 4 panelists. And once they had done it, like, I really enjoyed that. And it also gave them exposure to the other 50, 60 people that were listening. So there's a lot of value there where it doesn't have to be just people like us who are keynote speakers and can handle large audiences. You could be on a panel and it could be just a conversational thing online.
It can. And the other thing is that if you're approached to speak at an event, not a panel, but actually be a presenter, and you're not sure about it, Reg, I'm sure you can help them with that. But ask to be interviewed.
Yes.
And just do it as an interview, because it takes the pressure off. Because if I ask you a question about your business, you can answer it. I believe that's all a talk is anyway. A talk is a series of answers to questions that you're posing in your head. But if you have someone to pose those questions for you, you don't have to remember the questions. And that's what sees everyone freeze. So ask if the MC or someone else, a journalist perhaps, get a journalist involved, because then they might write it up as well, and you become a media source for them. If they ask you the questions, you should be confident answering questions about your business.
Brilliant. Yeah, great
And it
advice.
makes it easy.
Last thing I want to ask you, Andy, before we sort of wrap up today, appreciate your time, would be around just the whole COVID-19 pandemic situation. With all the work you've done, all of these years, how has anything changed, and what tips would you give us now when it comes to building professional relationships during COVID-19? Until there's a vaccine, we know that things are going to keep spiking. They'll go up, they'll go down. It will happen in one part of the world, then it will bounce back into another part of the world. We're seeing what's happening in America already. So, we know it's going to be here for a while. So what's your tips around building professional relationships in this pandemic situation?
Number one would be dial up the empathy. One of the biggest things I've learned over this period is the impact you have if you're not empathetic to the person on the other end of the line. 4 times I've upset people without meaning to, and the conversations have been no different to normal times. But that's been the problem.
An example, like what happened?
Someone had said that they would review a copy of my next book for me, and we were really pressed on the deadline. And she sent me a text and said, "How are you? I'm really sorry I haven't had a chance to do it." I can't remember the exact detail. And I replied and I said, "That's absolutely fine. I wanted your input, but that's fine." It was a pretty transactional. That's fine. And her response was, "You didn't even ask how I am. Yes. I've just been furloughed. This has happened. This has happened. This has happened." I was so involved in my own world and my own challenges and my own disappointment that I didn't think what was behind that. And she kicked back. And, that's happened 3 or 4 times, where that doesn't happen normally, because normally people aren't that sensitive. And I don't say that in a derogatory way. I think it's an important thing to recognize, and being sensitive is fine. But now that's ratcheted up, they kick back a bit more. But still, in a professional world, because I know her personally, in a professional world, people will be less likely to tell you what's bugging them, but their sensitivities are still dialed high.
I reckon you're bang on, because you may think you're okay, and then there's assumption that everyone else is okay, but you don't know their world. It's a bit like, I was reaching out to someone on WhatsApp the other day. We were having a very good conversation because he had sent me a link of something. And then by the end of it, we were talking about a follow-up, and he said, "Well, I can't right now because I've got COVID. I've got COVID-19, and this is where I'm at." I'm like, and I was shocked, thinking,
didn't have a clue.
Yeah, I didn't have a clue, and now obviously I'm on top of it, and that's my only focus, which is to make sure he's going to be all right, and he is okay. But he's going through a horrible time right now, and yet when he approached me during that message, it seemed like he was fine, because he was being optimistic. He wanted to also remain positive. But it's only until we got to that place, I like everything we've spoken about in the last 5-10 minutes is irrelevant now.
And he wants to work as normal and be treated as normal, but that's behind him. I talked to someone in one of the big banks in the UK, and we spent most of the time talking about her mother who lived 200 miles away, and wouldn't come up to London to be looked after, and was on her own, and she was worried about her going out, and her mother-in-law and her father-in-law and all these issues, and my own family issues as well. And I said to her, because we were talking about this very topic, and I said, she had said to me that it was so hard for her. So she's having to drive 200 miles to see her mum, even though she shouldn't, but her mother's got no one. Um, and how hard it is for her every time she leaves her mum. And I said, how would you feel if someone phoned you just, let's say, 20 minutes after you drove away, after all that emotion, and they were really transactional with you on that call? And they wouldn't have a clue what was going on in her world, but it would certainly influence her response. So number one, we have to dial up the empathy, and I think that's a good lesson going forward. Anyway, if you sell, and particularly if you sell to the corporate world, um, it can be such a frustrating and lonely experience, because you put in call after call after call and they don't respond, and then suddenly 6 months later they reach out to you. Every time you don't get a response, the inner dialogue kicks in. And this goes back to what we said earlier about we apply meaning to things. The inner dialogue kicks in and we go, well, they're not interested, or they're rude, or this is happening and that's happening. When I talk to them, so I hope, good relationships, you'd hope, with what I do with my clients. They tell me they're working 15, 18-hour days, that this has happened and that's happened, there's redundancies and so on. Now, all the time they're not returning my call. Am I factoring that in? Well, I try to, but of course, my inner monkey, my inner chimp, doesn't want to. It just says, well, they're not interested and they're rude and they've moved with someone else. We need to dial up the empathy and
Right.
sort of take that inner dialogue away. So
Yeah,
that
because
would be
people are
my
dealing with a
top.
lot of different stuff, and it's not your
Yeah,
stuff. And we
yeah.
we assume sometimes, and and it's nothing personal, is it, between them and you as well? They've just got other things that they're dealing with, which are more important.
Just because we're center of our own worlds doesn't mean we're center of everyone else's.
Yeah. Apart
Uh,
from empathy, what
I,
else would be important right now when it comes to building
I, I, th-
professional
I
relationships?
think using the technology that's available in in a thoughtful way. So, for example, not everyone is comfortable with using Zoom or Teams or Skype or whatever. It's actually very tiring. For me to make eye contact with you, I have to look at that little green light. I'm not looking at you, Reg. If I look at you, it feels like I'm looking away, which will drain your energy because you feel like I'm not paying attention. So we're having conversations without eye contact. Pick up the phone. The conversations I've had, more than one, with people who've said, I enjoy a phone call now more than I ever did, because I can walk away from the computer screen. I was speaking with a client of mine uh, the, uh, uh, on Monday earlier this week, and he was saying, I'm trying to have more calls on the phone so I can go out for a walk. While I'm doing it, because I'm stuck behind my
Not
desk at
until
my home.
someone zooms you on your mobile.
You can, but then you walk into lampposts when you're trying to do it.
Yeah.
But I was on a group call the other day, and I joined it with my camera off because I needed to go. And I kept the camera off, and I walked into the woods, found a spot by the lake, and then I turned it on.
Mm.
But it's about using the technology that's there, but using it sparingly and thoughtfully. So if someone's not comfortable on Zoom, just be okay to pick up the phone, and pick up the phone anyway. If you have staff working from home, pick up the phone to them or Zoom them, whatever it might be, but about how they are, not about what they're doing, and separate the calls. Reach out to them on a personal level and make sure they're okay, particularly if they live alone or if they're in a situation where it's difficult to work from home, when maybe they got young
That's
kids.
very powerful, Andy. And I think it's not just about staff, because I know in your book you talk about, there's a chapter on loneliness in
Mm,
leadership.
yeah.
So I don't, it's not just staff, it's also what I've found, maybe not phone calls, but I am using Zoom a lot, where I'm taking 3, 4, maybe maximum 5 people that I haven't met for a while, haven't spoken to for a while, and just setting up Zoom meetings. And it makes a big difference just to be able to spend half an hour, see someone, talk to them, and it's like having a real meeting. You know, and it's amazing that you can do this now. You know, 10 years ago, I remember even trying to use Zoom 3 years ago with someone in America, and it didn't work properly. And you know, technology is evolving all the time for us to have these type of meetings. So I think, yeah, I get you, but I picked up on one thing you said. It's not just your staff; it's also the other way around. If you're listening right now and you've got a boss, and you've got someone in another country, or you've got an owner who you haven't met for 9 months because they're always busy and you hardly see them in your actual office. What about the other way around? Contacting them and say, hey, are you okay? Are you all right?
I interviewed for my next book, Just Ask. I interviewed Phil Gardner, who was the sales and marketing director of Thomas Cook, the travel agency, which went into liquidation 2018, 2019. And Phil was telling me about that day, and he had to make 200 people redundant. And obviously, a really, really tough day for him. And Phil's a very heart on your sleeve, authentic leader. And he said it didn't hit him until he went to get some lunch in the cafeteria, and a quite junior member of staff came up to him and said, "How are you?" And he ended up in going to the toilet and crying, because he'd been bottling it all up inside. And I think there's a tendency for leaders to want to appear as supermen, and staff don't want a superman. They want a human being who gets them, who understands the challenges, is challenged themselves, but knows how to corral their resources to find the way forward. And showing that vulnerability can be very empowering for your staff.
Yeah, very, very powerful. I think we should conclude there and finish on that powerful message, Andy. I want to thank you for your time, your words of wisdom, your insights, your ideas. And again, for those of you watching all the way to the end of this video, don't forget to go to the description area. Andy's details are there. Definitely connect with him on LinkedIn. Mention that you've watched this episode and find out more about what he does on the platform virtually, as well as when people are back doing live conferences and all the consulting things that his company offers. Because as you can imagine, just from this video and all the tips he's given, he's got a lot more behind that and full of substance. So on that note, Andy, thank you very much. Stay safe, and we will definitely connect again soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you as well, Reg.